During the legislative session, they passed, and actually Governor Malloy just signed a bill to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana. And I know that you're also not only a senator, but a police officer. And so we were just trying to figure out how law enforcement is trying to handle this transition.
Well, it started July 1, and we'll handle it like enforcing the law that it is. Basically, it's going to be anything less than a half ounce of marijuana in somebody's possession will result in a traffic ticket, and I think it's $197 if I'm correct on that dollar amount, but somewhere in that vicinity. Mm-hmm. And the folks will pay a traffic ticket. If you're under 21, there's an additional penalty of a suspension of your driver's license for, I think it's a 60-day period. So there's a disincentive for young folks that are in their experimental stages and ages that we don't want them to practice, using marijuana, especially in a motor vehicle when they're driving. They're just learning how to handle a car, and then if they're under some influence, that put two things together is pretty dangerous.
Have any of these citations been given out?
I know in my agency, not as of yet.
Okay.
And in the Farmington Valley, I'm not aware of anybody that's enforced the rule of yet. And once again, we have discretion. An officer can certainly, if they're not sure about it yet, they can seize it as contraband and let the person go with a warning. So there's nothing that says you have to make the arrest immediately.
And I think actually, I think it was West Hartford Police Chief James Sterlacci who brought up an interesting point. Now that it's not going to, that amount of marijuana is not going to be criminalized, what do you do with that? Because it's not going to be part of evidence in a court challenge. Where does the actual bag of marijuana go?
Right, that will be destroyed. That we made sure that there was it was built in our legislation because we talked about that. And generally, what happens if it goes to court? The court would order the police department to either they wouldn't return it to the owner, but they'd order it to be destroyed. And now it says that if the police seize that marijuana, it can be destroyed.
Oh, okay.
Because again, the person has the right to plead not guilty if they want on the back of the traffic ticket and take it to court. So you need to hold on to that as evidence for a temporary period of time. And once you get the a court order back that says they pled guilty or they pled no contest and paid the fine, then it can be destroyed.
Oh,
what do you think is going to be the effect of that? Do you think that's going to be an adverse effect or a good effect? The idea would be that we're not going to be crowding the prison systems with a whole bunch of folks for these smaller crimes or lesser crimes. But does that lead to anything more substantial?
Well, I think that's it's double-edged sword here. I think that there's going to have positive impacts, but then there's also going to have negative impacts. And I think that the potential negative impacts could outweigh the positive impacts. And the positive impacts would be, just as you said, less folks crowding the court dockets, so we can use the time in our crowded courtrooms for more severe punishments and penalties. And but the second part is these kids that they sometimes start with marijuana, and they, not all the time, but they may go on to other types of drugs, and that's the harmful thing. And once again, while we may say that it's a non-criminal offense to have it in your possession in your car, but if you're smoking it and you're driving a car, you could be held under the Connecticut state statutes under the driving under the influence and be arrested for DUI. So that's something totally separate. And so folks that think that they can smoke marijuana and get behind the wheel of a car with a small amount in their car saying, I'm only going to get a $197 traffic ticket, that's not necessarily the case.
Is there any way, I know there's a breathalyzer test for drinking. Is there any way to test to see if someone has been smoking marijuana under the influence and driving a car at the same time?
Sure. The officer would administer the field side sobriety test similar to what they do for somebody that's we believe to be under the influence of alcohol. But the test, other than the intoxilizer, would be a urine sample. And we would be required to take the individual down to the police department, provide a urine sample, and then the charge would be done through an arrest warrant application once those records are received after a search warrant from a local hospital that would do an analysis of the urine.
Well, wouldn't you, I'm more curious about the process. Wouldn't you have to then, wouldn't you really arrest the person to bring them back? How do you get the person back to the police station?
You're basing the arrest on a probable cause, and just like if you arrest somebody that you believe is intoxicated from alcohol and they blow into the machine and the machine says 000, so it shows no level of intoxication, then what the officer might do on the second test, they may say, well, we're going to either send you for a blood sample or we're going to require you to provide a urinalysis. And the person is still charged because of the operation of the motor vehicle, the failure of the field side sobriety test, and this is all based on the officer's training and experiences. And the intoxilizer or the urinalysis is just the technical, scientific mechanism that shows that they have violated the law.
Good or bad, do you think?
I was just going to say, we should say that you did vote against this legislation.
Did, because I think that the negative outweighs the positive. But we'll see. I hope that I'm wrong in this sense, and I hope that we don't see an increase of marijuana usage amongst our citizenry, and that the courts do realize a reduction in their cases. And I don't have a problem admitting that I'm wrong, but we'll wait to see.
It'd be interesting to know how you would benchmark that. I mean, do you have stats on how many folks in your district use marijuana? I mean, how would you do it with an arrest record? But now it's easier to get away with it, I guess.
Well, I did an analysis a few years ago, and believe it or not, I had proposed this bill when I was in the House of Representatives, the decriminalization of marijuana. And some people say, well, geez, Kevin, you're a hypocrite. You proposed it, but then you voted against it. Well, why did you do that? Well,
flip-flopper.
Right. The reason being is I did an analysis at the police department. We made 72 arrests one year for possession of less than 4 ounces of marijuana, and that's how the law is currently codified. And 2 people pled guilty, and they paid a $50 fine. Well, the other 70 cases were thrown out under an anomaly. So I said to myself, that's ridiculous. All the police time involved in that and the court time doesn't make any sense. If the courts are just going to throw it out, why should we do that? And then this past year, I had the opportunity to take 2 8th-grade students through a law enforcement, similar police academy experience. And we went to the Hartford Community Court, which is where the Farmington Valley towns send their non-felony cases, and had a chance to meet with the judge, Norco. And he explained why he thinks it's important for people that make these minor drug offenses to come before him. And he said the main goal is treatment. And then if they stay on task, they don't get in trouble anymore, then it gets wiped off their record. And it's a lesson learned sometimes coming before a judge. And you lose that now with the institution of the new law. And that had a huge impact on me. And he said, we're not out to give people records and to throw people in jail. He said, it's just sometimes you need that extra push to get people into a program or into the system and realize you're coming back and we may test you one more time in 6 months or 9 months, and you better be clean. Otherwise, more penalties could befall upon you. And that weighed a lot in my decision, so I ended up voting against the bill.